So Kelly today is going to take us through an introduction to positive intelligence, which is amazing. So we're going to discover what's holding us back and what our saboteurs are, those voices in our head that generate stress and negative emotions, and how they sabotage our potential. Is that right, Kelly?
Exactly that. Thank you, Mark.
Brilliant. Right. Well, Kelly, listen, I'm going to shut up. Over to you. Usual rules apply. It's in-house. It's membership only. Feel free to interrupt and butt in and ask questions. As I said, I'm going to shut up now. And Kelly, over to you. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Yeah, absolutely. I've got a lot to get through to share with you today. There is going to be a little bit of interaction as well. And actually, on that note, as I'm just doing a bit of an introduction about me, I've opened up the chat. If I know it's a pain if you're on your phone, but if it's accessible, just pop in a few words into the chat about what's brought you here today, because that will help me consider around, if there's anything I need to tweak to make sure I cover what you wanted as well. So by way of an introduction to those of you that I don't already know, my name is Kelly Keating, and in fact, sorry, there we go. A little bit about me. So I get bored of traditional sort of bios, and I got inspired last year by a fellow coach and how she introduced herself, and I've shamelessly stolen that format. So I won't read it word for word, but you can see on the screen a little bit about me and who I am, both as a whole person, so more than just a label of my day job. I guess the things I would call out is that I am perimenopausal, and earlier this year, after a few years of exploring it, I did get diagnosed with ADHD. So you can imagine there's all sorts of things going on in my brain at the moment. So that's why maintaining my own mental fitness has been so vital. And that's a lot of what's brought me here today to share what I've learned with you.
Kelly, I'm a man, so I can interrupt. It sounded as if you were thinking you were sharing your screen.
Yes.
Which you're not.
Pardon. Thank you for interrupting. Good point. I stopped the share, didn't I? There we go, everyone. Can you see?
That's much better. Thank you, Kelly.
Excellent. Thank you for interrupting, Mark. So yeah, so as I mentioned, I won't read it out, but the things that I care about are I've reached that point in my life where I care less about the small stuff, and probably even more vehemently about the big stuff that's important to me. The stuff that is important to me is having a portfolio career. So since I had my son 7 years ago, I've worked part-time. I still work part-time in behavioural change within technology at JP Morgan. But I also have a small coaching practice, and I'm a non-executive director. I'm the chair of an intergenerational charity, and I'm also on a multi-academy trust board. So thank you for having me here today, and hopefully as we go on you'll learn a little bit more about me, because I'll be sharing some of my story where I think it's relevant too. Okay, on to the next slide. So just to reiterate what Mark said, what I hope you'll take away from this is to understand a little bit more about what your saboteurs are, and some key three sort of mental muscles that you can look to build to help stop those saboteurs from holding you back and stopping you from being the best that you want to be, both in your work but also in your life and happiness. And we are going to practice a couple of exercises to how you can build that mental muscle. And if you wanted to learn more, there'll be opportunities to connect with me both one-to-one and in a group setting as well. Okay, so we've got a lot to get through today. So as Mark said, feel free at any point to ask a question. Just because I can't see you all, the easiest way to do that is to come off mute and just ask rather than raise your hand. So but I hope to get us done by 1 o'clock, because I know this is a lunch break for all of you. So let's start first of all on what the topic of mental fitness is, what that means and how we can apply that day to day. So mental fitness is essentially around growing your 3 core mental muscles to help you thrive. So we all know what we should do around sort of our physical fitness, but our mental fitness and understanding our ability to improve that and control on that is something that's often forgotten. The definition of mental fitness is your capacity to respond to life's challenges with a positive mindset rather than a negative mindset. I often refer to it as your kind of bounce back ability. So it's part of your resilience and your brain's ability not to go down those negative spirals, but to actually maintain that positive mindset. The impact that can have on your life is significant. It's around peak performance. So, you know, both in your career and your busy lives outside of your career. It helps you to maintain your peace of mind and wellness. And where I've found it really helpful is around healthy relationships. You know, I know that you're all here today working in financial services, and so much of what we do is dependent on our relationships at work, and we all come across challenging stakeholders at times. So hopefully you can learn as to how improving your mental fitness can help you in those circumstances too. The background of PQ is from a guy called Shahzad Shamain. So he's a New York Times bestselling author. He used to be the CEO of the world's largest coach training organization, the CTI, and he's coached C-suite executives and CEOs from around the world. So the foundation of his research around positive intelligence is built on positive psychology, performance science, neuroscience, and cognitive behavioral psychology. So where he's got to with this kind of concept is built off years of significant research. So for those of you in the audience that are interested in that, feel free to Google it and you can find out a lot more. So yeah, just quickly. So as I mentioned, Stanford students, CEOs, world-class athletes, and with over 500,000 participants from global companies. So at its core, the secret sauce that he applies to positive intelligence is around factor analysis. So this is around discovering the root cause. By focusing on the root cause and those three behaviors that he talks about, it results in radical simplification. So if you use the example of at the root of thousands of different colors are only those three factors of red, blue, and green, it gives you an idea as to how the thinking behind PQ. So from all of this significant research that I just touched on, he's defined that there are three core muscles that are at the root of mental fitness, and we're going to explore briefly each of those today. The first one is the saboteur interceptor. The second one is your sage. And finally, your self-command muscle. So these are the core muscles that will help you to better handle life's challenges, maintain that positive mindset, and hopefully minimize the amount that you get stressed and upset. So it's my role here today for me to share you how to understand those and look to grow them for yourself. I'm conscious that I've just covered a lot there, but before we go to the next slide, does anyone have any questions? Anything come up? Let me just check the chat quickly. I think someone's put. Thank you. Thank you to the person who's put something in the chat. I think you can probably take a lot from this. Okay, I'll go on then to talk a bit more around the first one. So when I talk about saboteurs, the thinking behind positive intelligence research is that there's 10 different agents of self-saboteur, and most of us will have a few of these. There's a free test that I'll be sharing with you later that you can do to assess your own personal saboteurs, but when we look to touch on them, you'll probably recognize some of them in yourself immediately. But on the positive front, to combat those 10 sort of saboteurs, there are 5 different sage powers that you can use to help you banish your saboteurs, and we're going to touch briefly on those as well. So of the 3 core muscles, the first we're going to look at and probably spend the most time on is the saboteur interceptor. So this essentially allows us to acknowledge and notice the saboteurs as they're talking to us in our heads. to stop it in its tracks, if you like, and stop the damage and stress that could come as if you don't recognize those saboteurs and you allow them to sort of take over your thinking and doing. So the first kind of master saboteur that everyone will have in one way or another is the judge. We will all have this. It's the reality. It is what we're all humans. And the judge has three different modalities, some that are more obvious than others, but I encourage you to reflect on these as I read them out. The first one is your self-judge. This is sometimes referred to as your inner critic. This could be the one that wakes you up or keeps you awake and makes you go over something over and over in your mind. The one that questions what you're doing, how you're doing it, the one who notices and shouts at every kind of imperfection. And it's interesting, actually, Mark asked me around, is this a woman's sort of lens? And this isn't. This is global research done on 500,000 humans. So this is something that we do all have. The second mode is our judge of others. And again, it could be a bit embarrassing, but again, consciously or unconsciously, we tend to fall into this trap as well. So this mode is constantly finding what's wrong with other people. The one that looks for what's wrong rather than looks for what's right about people. Oh, they're too loud or too quiet or too aggressive or too passive, whatever it may be. The second mode is around the judging of others. And third and finally, and I guess I can see this a lot actually in financial services, because sometimes our kind of reward and promotion systems almost encourage this, but this is around actually judging consistently around your situation and your circumstances. So it could be telling yourself that you're not going to be happy until you've got that promotion. You're not going to be happy until you've got that new Tesla. You're not going to be happy until you've had your second child. Whatever it is, this is actually judging and constantly sort of going over the circumstances that are potentially causing you stress and unhappiness, rather than actually being in the moment and enjoying the journey that you're on and the mountain that you're climbing as you're climbing it, rather than constantly looking for the peak. I'm going to pause there for a moment, and if anyone's feeling brave, either come off mute or put in the chat and just share what of those three modalities of the judge spoke to you the most, which is the one that shows up for you.
I think the third one for me, Kelly, is an instant kind of, one that I resonate with. And I would love to hear more. I guess we'll cover it during the session about how do you stay in the present moment without feeling as if you're escaping your worries.
Thanks, Nita. There's a great question. And the third power that we look into is all around some different exercises that you can do to stay present. And why this model resonated so much with me is I've been to all the kind of mindfulness talks and I know what we should be doing, and that's never really resonated with me, whereas these exercises I found much more accessible and doable for me. So I'm hoping that will resonate for you too. But on that note, I will go to the next slide just to make sure we do get to that point and have time to practice those exercises. Okay, so these are the 9 additional saboteurs that have come up beyond the judge. And as I mentioned, I will share with Mark a link that can be shared for you all to do your free saboteurs assessment. This is in it. Sorry, I'm just going to go through very briefly what each of these means at the highest level. As you can see on the left-hand side, this is like the style, a sort of preference that these saboteurs show up in, and then also your sort of personal motivations as to how they could be impacting your saboteurs. So starting from the top, the controller, and I'd encourage you to listen and maybe make a note if this sounds like you and feels like you. The controller is someone who might have anxiety-based needs to take charge and control of situations. They might have high anxiety and impatience when it's not possible for them to have that control. The hyperachiever is dependent on constant performance and achievement for self-respect and self-validation. They focus a lot on external validation, attention, and acceptance of others. This could lead to things like being an unsustainable workaholic tendencies, loss of touch with your own deeper emotion and your relationship needs. Restless, I think we're going to go into it in a minute. I think this is my highest one. Restless is constantly in search of greater excitement in the next activity, having a sort of sense of constant busyness. They're rarely at peace or content with the current activity, and the restlessness could be a strategy to escape from dealing with fears, anxieties, or painful feelings. The stickler, this is essentially perfectionism and a need for order and organisation taken too far. The pleaser is indirectly tries to gain acceptance and affection by helping, pleasing, rescuing, or flattering others. This unfortunately leads to them sometimes losing sight of their own needs, and you could become resentful as a result of that. Hypervigilant is continuous, intense anxiety about the dangers of what could go wrong, a kind of vigilance that's never at rest. The victim is, the avoider is someone focused on the positive and pleasant in an extreme way. Someone who avoids difficult and unpleasant tasks and conversations, doesn't, stays away from any type of conflict. The victim can be emotional and temperamental. It's a way to gain attention and affection. It can be an extreme and persistent focus on internal feelings, particularly painful ones. This can be a kind of martyr streak. And then finally, the hyper-rationalized. So this is intense and exclusive focus on the rational processing of everything, including relationships. Someone with this saboteur could be perceived as having a cold and distant, perhaps intellectually arrogant. So I'm hoping, I'd encourage you to just take a moment to reflect and think about how your stress is caused. Which of these might be showing up for you in those stressful situations and compounding those emotions and those feelings. It might be, impacting your relationships, both in work and outside of work, your performance, when you think about the sort of perfectionism and so forth around getting your deliverables done and so forth. And the reality is we all have these, and we all have the judge, and it's fine. And the value in understanding them and being able to intercept them is where you can then really move forward and make positive progress. So I'd encourage you not to kind of, judge yourself on, oh, that's me. The first step in recognizing and moving forward is doing that. So please realize we all have them, and it's perfectly normal. And on that note, I will just share an example. So my top three are a restless, pleaser, and hyperachiever, as you can see there. It's interesting actually, because I think I did this before I had my neurodiverse diagnosis, and I think there's definitely some links certainly to the restless piece with how my brain is obviously wired. If you go on to do the test, just as a bit of an awareness, you'll get a personalized report that goes into more detail than I've shared around the characteristics, how the thoughts and feelings kind of show up, the lies that our judge tells us about these things. So this one for me, I know I still sort of tell myself, oh yeah, I've got to do this and I've got to do that because life is short and we've got to live it. Whereas actually, I would and do benefit from more self-care and more time out and actually enjoying what I'm doing in the moment rather than thinking about the next thing that I'm looking to do. I'm going to pause. Would anyone like to share which really spoke to them, that they recognized in themselves?
Restless avoider and pleaser.
Thank you, Bronwyn. How would you say, would you be comfortable to share an example of where that is perhaps holding you back? Or
oh, definitely, because I sort of I managed to flip from one thing to the next. So what I'm doing is I'm avoiding some of the things I'm dreading by moving on to something else, or going and doing something that probably isn't on the deadline, as a way of avoiding actually tackling doing the opposite of that, eat that frog first.
Mm.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And the people pleasing is just on the home front as much as anything else, trying to putting everybody else's needs before mine.
Thank you. Really appreciate you sharing that, Bronwyn. I'm sure many others will resonate with what you've shared. Okay. So firstly, a question that sometimes comes up when we talk about this, but surely negative emotions are good for you. And I guess then I counter that with is pain good for you? What do people think about whether pain is positive or good for you or not?
I think it is good for you, because it then heightens your awareness to something. So then you might then deal with it. So I would say it's a good thing.
Lara, thank you for that. And actually, I would agree to a certain extent. And the caveat I would put there is using the example of, putting your hand on a hot stove. In that instance, you would get pain, and it's your body. Your body is telling your mind and triggering you to, obviously, this is pain. I don't want this pain, and I'm going to step back from it. And in the same way, this is how kind of negative emotions can be helpful to you, in as much as try and think about your negative emotions or pain being helpful as an alert, is a 1 second or as quick as possible kind of signal to actually alert you to what's going on, and take you back into the moment to actually think, okay, what does this actually mean? So if you stay in that negative emotion and that hurt, your ability to respond in a positive way to keep that kind of positive mindset. So responding with empathy, curiosity, creativity, or laser focused action, to Bronwyn's point, not avoidance. It's having that awareness, and that's exactly what the saboteur interceptor is all about. So as a reminder, these are with the judge as the overall one, these are the 10 different saboteurs. I'd invite you to spend a couple of minutes doing a quick exercise. So whether you've got some pen and paper or just in your minds, have a look at one of those saboteurs, the one that you feel is potentially holding you back the most, showing up for you the most. And think about the emotions that causes. And then I'd invite you to reframe around the lies that you're telling yourself around that particular saboteur. So, for example, like the pleaser that Bronwyn talked about, you're perhaps indirectly trying to gain acceptance and affection by helping and pleasing and flattering others. But that is then, leading to perhaps you losing sight of your own needs. And I know it's an age-old adage, but that, the need to actually put on your own oxygen mask to ensure that you are there to best look after others, be it your family, your friends, or your work colleagues. So I invite you for a couple of minutes, we'll take until 12:30, to just write down, take that moment to reflect and write down what that top saboteur that you identified is, the emotions that it brings you, the lies that you're telling yourself about it, when perhaps you are triggered into that moment of pain, if you like. If you can probably just think back today or this week, what of those circumstances that have happened, those meetings you've been in, those conversations that you've had that have triggered that saboteur. And this is for you. You don't have to share or anything. Just take a moment. I can see some of you still writing away. I'd encourage you to come back to that maybe at the end of the session if there's still some other things that you'd like to explore. Before we move on, I'd invite anyone who would like to share any light bulbs that they might have had, or in fact, we might have seen some in the chat. Right. Thanks, Anita. Sorry, I missed your response to the pain question. Who would like to just briefly share what came up for them? Yeah, Alamendan, thank you.
Hi, Kelly. Well, one of the things that came up for me when I was writing the lies is that I tend to say to myself in moments where I'm avoiding, which is one of the saboteurs that shows up the most, and I'm anxious, I'm fearful. I tend to tell myself that, you know, I'm incompetent and disorganized, and how do I intend to achieve my potential when I can never do anything at the time. But I recall that I did a session earlier in the year, and I think it was with you. And one of the things I came away from that session was that I do hard things, even when I'm avoiding and I have all these emotions going on. So I thought what a discrepancy it is that I tell myself constantly that I don't achieve because I avoid. But then I still have a view of myself that although this is hard, I still show up, I still do it in the end. So I found that a little interesting to see as I wrote that down.
Thank you for sharing that. And the whole point of the Saboteur Interceptor is exactly that, raising our own awareness of how our minds can somehow take us over. But the fact that regardless of that, we still manage to achieve fantastic things throughout our life. And I guess I would invite you to think about how much more could you achieve, or how much more could you increase your happiness if you could banish those kind of inner critic thoughts. Okay, that section was pretty rapid, but that has given you an insight into the Saboteur Interceptor. And that, as I mentioned, of the 3 core muscles, is the first one to start consider recognizing that. And as I mentioned, if you wanted to do the free assessment so you can get your own personalized report, I'll send out the link to Mark after the session. The next muscle is the sage. And this one is all about reframing kind of how we respond. So within our lives, our brain is associated with many, the sage, is associated with different ways of thinking. So that's positive emotions, peace and calm, clear-headed focus, creativity, and big picture thinking. And I know when I sort of did my training and experienced this myself, this was one that did take quite a lot of internal, new programming, if you like, because it's like, oh, that sounds, a bit utopian. Is that real in everyday life? But when I was doing it myself, I did have some, very relatable everyday applications where I was able to step into the sage and completely reframe and bounce back into a positive mindset much quicker. So I'm hoping to share a little bit with you today around how to do that. So simply, the sage perspective is that every outcome or circumstance can be turned into a gift or opportunity. I've consciously paused for a moment there because I know that your inner judge will be saying, oh, yeah, as if that's fine, yeah, but life's shit and these things happen and blah, blah, blah. But at its core, and it is really vital, is that you do maintain that belief. And I'm going to share a short fable that is part of, that is included in part of his book. That just helps you consider. It's a nice way to consider how this could be true if you actually sort of reframed your thinking. So this is a fable that comes from China, and it's called the Stallion Story. So an old farmer lives on a farm with his teenage son. He also has a beautiful stallion that he lovingly cares for. The farmer enters his stallion into the annual country fair competition, and the stallion wins first prize. The farmer's neighbours gather round to congratulate his win, and he calmly responds by saying, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" Puzzled by this reaction, the neighbours go away. The next week, some thieves who had heard about the stallion's increased value decide to steal the horse. When the neighbours come to commiserate with the farmer, they find him again very calm and gathered, and he says, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" Several days later, the spirited stallion escapes from the thieves and finds his way back to the farm, bringing with him a few wild mares he has befriended along the way. To his neighbours' excited rounds of congratulations, the old farmer once again says, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" A few weeks later, the farmer's son is thrown off one of those new mares as he is trying to break it in, and his leg is fractured. As the neighbours gather round to commiserate with the old farmer, once again he reminds them, "Who knows what is good and what is bad?" The following week, the Imperial Army marches through the village, conscripting all eligible young men for the war that has just broken out. The farmer's son is spared due to his fractured leg. The neighbours no longer bother to come to the old farmer and congratulate him. By now they know what his response will be. Who knows what is good and what is bad? The purpose of sharing that fable is that this story is grounding reminder that when unexpected things happen in life, such as a pandemic, for example, we can't immediately know whether things are good or bad. And it's human to react with a range of emotions that we're faced with when we're faced with surprises and uncertainty. I imagine, again, maybe I share too much. I don't know if anyone's here from JP Morgan, but there's constant change and constant uncertainty in most large corporations. And I think by embracing the feelings that you're experiencing, feeling the joy and the heartache, and it's helpful to remember to know that in that moment and in that situation, things that could be perceived as really bad, like COVID, for example, can sometimes be a blessing in disguise that brings us a gift and might help us to make choices that are more aligned with the life that we want. So the SAGE mindset is all around building that practice to actually see things and see gifts in each situation. I guess sort of bringing it back to the pandemic, whilst I'm not in any way minimizing the horrors and the death and so forth that it did bring, for many of us, we retuned back with nature. We spent more time outside. For many of us, it's accelerated flexible working, beyond what we could have ever imagined beyond the pandemic. So understanding that there are gifts, and whilst they might not be apparent at first, we all make an active choice on how we respond and how we deal with those emotions. On that note, which perspective is true? So the saboteur would say, this is bad. The sage would reframe it and say, this is a gift. If I was to ask you, to think of a situation that's perhaps niggled you recently, you don't need to share, but bring it up for you, whether it's a work one or a home one. If your response is perhaps in the saboteur mindset and that inner critic and those voices are telling you this is bad, how could you reframe that to think of it as a gift? Because in reality, the perspective that is true is whichever you believe is likely to come true. I'm going to pause there and encourage anyone to share perhaps what's coming up for them.
I get the point on the perspective that you can choose what perspective you want. What I'm struggling to come to terms with is whatever we believe becomes true. How does that happen?
I think the research shows you that if you let your saboteurs take over your mind, the reality is that will take you down a negative spiral Whereas actually, if you can bounce back, have that mental resilience to actually reframe that situation and practice things like, for example, practicing gratitude, practicing actually receiving that as a gift and reframing those things in time, and all of this is based on building new habits that maintains a more positive mindset and allows you to actually do that. So if I was to think about where I applied this, was a particularly, I want to say, nasty stakeholder at work, actually. And he was exceptionally rude to a very close colleague of mine, and my immediate saboteur would have been to lose my shit and respond in a way that actually probably wouldn't have helped him, me, or her in the long term. And actually by being able to reframe that situation, and rather of sort of like my pleaser or whatever, thinking, oh, well, he's really senior and I've got to, and, blah, 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 blah. I was actually able to look at it through, the idea is that you also look through with empathy. So actually I reframed and looked through where he was coming from. There are actually different exercises that you can do. And again, this might sound a bit kind of out there, but I found it so helpful, is to think of that person as a child. The essence is, when we're a 5-year-old child, that we're all, pure and open and honest. And I literally did that exercise in that scenario. And within 5 minutes, I'd taught myself down. I'd realized that actually the way to respond to that, let's take this as a gift and let's reframe it and look at it differently as to where that might have come from, rather than reacting in a way that could have been detrimental to my career and probably wouldn't have actually helped the situation. Does that, I appreciate that's a very quick response, and it did take me time to build this muscle, and there are, but hopefully that gives you an idea as to a sort of practice.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying. I've tried something similar from a manifestation point of view, and I've generally found that it works, not in 100% cases, but 80% of the cases. So yeah, I agree with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nita. Thank you. That's great. How are we doing for time? Super, 42 minutes. Okay, so we've briefly touched upon the interceptor, the mechanism of understanding what those saboteurs are, recognizing them and responding to them. The SAGE perspective was a very brief introduction to you there, and as I mentioned, if you wanted to go on to learn more about it, there's different exercises and help to sort of use those in the moment if you like. But then we're finally going to go on to the self-command muscle. So as I mentioned earlier on, meditation does have many different facets, and I'm sure there's people on here who are far more experienced in it than I am. But for me, on a personal level, I struggled to apply myself to a lot of variations of meditation. My judge probably would say I haven't got the time, or I can't concentrate, or whatever it was. But for me, the most pivotal thing when I went through the sort of PQ program, if you like, was the ability to access very quick and easy ways to essentially meditate. And the idea at the core of this is something called PQ reps. So the idea for this is you are rebuilding your muscles and actually creating new neuroplasticity by doing this as a regular habit. And at its core, a PQ rep is about shifting as much of your attention to your body and any of your 5 senses for at least 10 seconds. So I'm hoping that 10 seconds feels accessible and doable. As an example, it could be by focusing on looking at something in front of you. So whether you're sat down, whether you're walking, focusing on nothing else other than looking at that tree in front of you, focusing at looking at nothing else than the coffee cup in front of you on your desk. Closing your eyes, perhaps, and truly listening to the closest sound to you, or even the furthest away sound. All of his research just shows that for doing this for 10 seconds, and the idea is you might, as part of the app that accompanies the program, if you wanted to do it, he does a number of exercises And the ones that I tend to do are 2 to 3 minutes, 3 or 4 times a day. So it makes it accessible in between meetings, or finding that time rather than having to find a half an hour or an hour for a class. I'm going to invite us all to experiment with a really super easy one now. And this is one that I do a lot, and it works in a hybrid environment. It works as if you're in the office as well, so you don't necessarily need to close your eyes in a busy open plan office. This one is all around focusing on the sense of touch. So I'm going to ask you to take 2 fingertips and rub them together with such a tension that you can feel your fingertips and the lines on them rubbing against each other. If you want to and you're comfortable to do so, feel free to close your eyes whilst doing it. Thank you. Believe it or not, just that 10-second rep, ever so slightly, quietens your brain where the saboteurs live and starts to actually activate the sage muscle. It's essentially bringing you back to be present and in that moment. So what ways and times that I use this are if I'm on a heightened call, if I can feel in my body that my shoulders are tightening, my saboteurs are wanting to take over, and perhaps there's a chance of me reacting rather than responding, I will sit under my desk and actually just do that rep for as long as I need to do it. A minimum of 10 seconds, maybe for a minute or 2, and it literally just brings me back and stops me. It's around that, evoking that awareness and switching that part of the brain off that could let you go into that sort of spiral of negative emotion. So if you take nothing from today, that very simple PQ rep is it my gift to you that you can hopefully sort of look to take forward. The essence of the operating system, if you like, and the simplicity of it is that if you're feeling negative emotions, stop, because the reality is you are in your saboteur mode and those saboteurs could be taking over. So recognize it, intercept it. Excuse me. Do some sort of PQ reps to quieten your saboteurs. So another one that I really like, which is really simple, and this perhaps wouldn't work in an open plan office, but it could work at home, is for 30 seconds, tense every part of your body, starting from the top. So you can close your eyes, you can clench your neck, and literally sort of throughout your body, just start to clench your fingers, your body, your legs, your ankles, and do that for 30 seconds. Hold it for 5 or 10 seconds and then release. And again, that is just some sort of magic that it just completely calms your whole body down and brings you back to a more sage state and mindset. The third one, which does take practice, is assuming that sage perspective, reframing that every problem can be converted into a gift or opportunity. And do that by generating those kind of sage powers. So empathy, how could I look at this person through them as a 5-year-old? What were they like, through curiosity, being genuinely curious around what is going on in this situation. Creativity, a way example that they use is kind of asking, and what else, and what else? So you can really start to think about what might be going on here to encourage your sort of creative mindset around how you could see this as a gift. And then finally, the calm, clear-headed action, which the PQ reps will help you to maintain. So a question that often comes up, is it really possible to just shift from saboteur to sage responses, even on really tough challenges? And life does throw really tough things at us, actually. And I'm going to try not to get too upset, but my first early career, I had what I called a work dad called Bob. And he literally was my work dad. But I got married early on in my career, and he drove me in his Jag to my first wedding. In fact, I'm not married to my current partner, but my only wedding. And I was so fond of him. We I grew up in work with him, if you like, as my kind of mentor and friend. Our lives then took different paths. He retired, but we'd always sort of keep in touch. And I hadn't seen him. Life gets busy, especially as a working mum, and I hadn't seen him for about a year and a half, but it was his birthday at the beginning of October, and he just turned 81, but he was on Facebook, and he would tend to respond to birthday messages, and he hadn't done. So I was like, oh, I happened to be close to where he lived a few days later, and I knocked on his door, and he wasn't there. So I phoned him. I was like, Bobby, where are you? How are you? And he's like, Cal, it's great. I'm having a wonderful time. I'm in Casablanca on a cruise with my sister for our birthdays. And it was just wonderful. I was like, great, have a great time. We'll catch up when we get back. And a week later, I got a message from his daughter. Dad's caught COVID on the cruise ship. He's really poorly. He's in hospital. I wonder if he's confused because he said that he'd spoken to you. And I said, no, he's not confused. I had spoken to him. And so forth. Sadly, on Monday, after thankfully I went and visited him in hospital, I got a note from his daughter to say that he passed away. And in that moment, because we do, loss and grief is probably the most negative emotion that many of us will encounter. And I'm not saying this is some magical cure, but I was upset and I was sad. But then I immediately started to look back at his photos, our times together. I started making notes of memories of all the things that we did, like a Christmas party when the DJ said, will someone please remove that woman from the dance floor because I'm so drunk. And it's like, Bob always kind of used that anecdote. So I guess that's just an example of where I think I've been able to build my positive muscles around seeing positivity. And I was able to celebrate Bob and the gifts that he provided me in being such a great friend. So yes, I do believe I'm a real advocate that by spending time on building our mental muscles, that the answer is that yes, but the speed and depth of that shift depends on building that mental muscle and strength. I know I should do more exercise. I know I should probably eat less naughty things. But actually for me, my mental health impacts my physical health and my ability to do this. So I found it super, super helpful being able to build this mental muscle. Just quickly, a little bit more around the PQ program. So it is built, as I mentioned, on habit forming. So lasting positive change does require that mental muscle to be built. So we've all been on courses or sessions like this, and you walk away from a workshop feeling empowered and fearless, and then a month or 3 months later you've kind of forgotten it and slipped back into past behaviors because you gained the insight, but you hadn't started to build that muscle. And as I mentioned, it is around rebuilding that neuroplasticity and building up that power so that when these neurons are connected, and I think I can't remember the science now, forgive me, but the reality is our brains are connected in a way that the negative emotions actually spread far quicker than the positive ones. So it does require time and effort to sort of build these neural pathways and the repetition of both things like the PQ reps and also the reframing to the SAGE perspective. So it is about building those mental muscles and not just stopping at insight. If there is appetite, I can share more details around the PQ team and an app that they have, which helps you for 6 to 8 weeks to start building through and building those positive habits into your lifestyle, into your brain. I did this. They say the majority of people find this hard to do on their own. When I did it with a small cohort of people, and we sort of share our experience and learn from each other to help keep us on track and inspired and motivated. And actually, yeah, sorry, my slides are the wrong way around. If you wanted to find out more about that, I'll be honest with you, I've trained this is my restless person in me. I trained as a PQ coach, and I have run a cohort at work for some of our colleagues, but I haven't got around to actually doing one in the big wide world as such. But I plan to host a cohort, and I will start probably in January to let everyone get Christmas and so forth out the way. But if you were interested around being part of that cohort to do a 6 to 8 week program, then do let me know. Let me come back to that. So it's a 6 week program. On top of that, I will include a 1 hour session, an individual session for you to explore your saboteur assessments and start to sort of work on an individual plan. The expectations for you to get the most out of it: you get sent a 1 hour video to watch weekly. I tended to watch it on the weekend or on a Monday. As I mentioned, the 15 minutes of daily practice in the app, and that generally is around 3-minute type exercises that you can and should be able to fit into your day quite easily. You'd be part of a pod that would be facilitated by me. So this is a sort of 30-minute to 45-minute session where we get together, share what we've learned from the week and our insights and so forth. Within the app, Shazad continues to be your kind of mental fitness coach for a year. And if you wanted to do that, the recommended retail price is $995. But because it's my first one doing it in the world, if you like, I'd be happy to do a reduced rate of $495. And as well as the group cohort and the app and the practice, you would get a 1-to-1 60-minute session with me too. I've somehow come in on time. So what I would encourage you all to reflect on in the last few moments that we've got left. Again, no need to share, but if any of you would like to, I'd be delighted to hear. What was your biggest light bulb moment from today? How will you begin to apply what you've learned today? And what else would you like to know on this topic? Because it has been a whistle-stop tour. Thank you all for your patience.
Kelly, thank you. That was inspiring. That was interesting. I feel like signing up myself. Thank you. If anyone's interested in the offer that Kelly's just made, can you reach out to Katie? And I'm sure Katie can get it organised. And Kelly, if you liaise with Katie, we can get it up on the website as well, so people can do things through there. But thank you. That was really, really interesting. And round of applause. We have a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to hijack this to just let everybody know of some of the things that are coming up, if that's okay, Kelly. So in terms of events, next or in 2 weeks' time, we're joined by Kat, another one of our coaches, who will be talking about a tool to help us all understand and influence others' behaviour. Also on the website on the 27th of November, we've got optimizing your LinkedIn profile course, which you can sign up to. Obviously hugely important in this modern age that we've all got fantastic and great LinkedIn profiles. 6th of December, we're joined by Cynthia, who probably has utilized a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, Kelly, actually, has really had an interesting and tough life. Faced a lot of adversity during it, and Cynthia is going to come on and talk about and share her story and share what she has done with that life and how to rise above. 7th of December, sorry, lots in the diary. We've got our E2W and Men for Inclusion Christmas social at the Wine Library in the City, which is a venue we've been to before. Again, encourage you to sign up. It'd be lovely to see everybody in person and have a little drink pre-Christmas. And that's it, I think. I think it's just about to turn 1 o'clock. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kelly. Do you want to say last words, Kelly?
I was just going to say really quickly, because it is free and accessible to everyone, I've put the link to the test in the chat. I will send it out to Katie or Mark But if you wanted to quickly copy it now, then you can do that immediately.
Lovely. Lovely. And this session's been recorded, so it will go onto the members platform at some stage. Right. It leaves me to say thank you very much for everybody. I'm going to hang around for 2 minutes or 3 minutes if anybody wants a quick chat afterwards. Otherwise, thank you for joining us and see you all again soon.